Martha sat upright, her back tense against the sofa, her eyes fixed on the polished clock face. Daniel was late again. She had tried to distract herself with the television, with her phone, even with folding the same pile of laundry twice, but the growing silence had become a presence, breathing beside her, watching with her. Her hands trembled as she picked up one of his shirts from the arm of the couch. There it was again, that faint but unmistakable scent. Not her perfume. A floral note too foreign, too sweet. Her chest tightened. Martha was beautiful in a quiet, dignified way. Her caramel skin glowed even under the dim yellow light, her cheekbones strong, and her dark eyes carrying a depth that once made Daniel call her his ocean. In her early 30s, she still had the grace of the girl he met at university, smart, composed with an inner fire that made people trust her. She worked as an interior designer, known among her clients for her taste and calm precision. Yet tonight, none of that confidence remained. The house, spacious, modern, full of framed pictures of their early years together, felt too large, too silent. Her mind kept pulling her back to memories. Daniel laughing at her cooking experiments, his arms around her while music filled the room, his promises whispered in the dark. Now, even those memories felt fragile. She thought she heard a car outside and sprang up, heart thudding. When the gate creaked, she didn't breathe. Then came the sound of the key turning in the lock. Daniel stepped in, his shirt slightly unbuttoned, his face shadowed by exhaustion, or something that looked like guilt. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his skin the color of polished mahogany, and his voice usually calm enough to soothe storms. But lately he spoke less. He offered a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sorry, love," he said, dropping his bag on the couch. "Work's been crazy. We had a late meeting." He smelled faintly of aftershave and something else, a note that made Martha's stomach twist. She forced a smile. "At this hour, Daniel?" she asked softly. He avoided her gaze, running a hand over his face. "You wouldn't understand. It's been tough at the office." "I'll explain later." Without waiting for her response, he brushed her shoulder lightly, the touch brief and cold, and walked toward the bedroom. She stood there, her fingers tightening around the hem of her robe. The sound of the shower running behind the closed door deepened the ache in her chest. The clock ticked again. The morning sun poured through the kitchen window, laying soft gold over the tiled counter. Martha moved quietly between the gas cooker and the sink, her wrapper tied neatly around her waist, her movements precise but distracted. The aroma of fried plantain and egg filled the air, yet her heart was far away. When the front door creaked, she turned, her face breaking into a half-smile as Tai-Tai's familiar voice filled the space. "Ah, Martha. My dear, you look tired. Oh, did you sleep at all?" Tai-Tai, with her full figure and loud laughter, brought life wherever she went. Her Ankara dress was bright orange and blue, and her gold earrings danced as she spoke. She was the kind of woman people turned to for advice, bold, outspoken, quick to judge yet fiercely loyal. She had known Martha since secondary school and was like a sister to her. "I tried," Martha said, placing a steaming mug of tea on the table. Daniel came home late again. Tai-Tai raised an eyebrow, drawing out the chair beside her. "Again? My sister, when a man starts coming home after 10, just know something has changed." Her tone carried a mix of humor and warning. Martha sighed, stirring her tea slowly. "You're always suspicious, Tai-Tai. Not every late night means trouble." Tai-Tai leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm not suspicious for nothing. You think I don't know men? My own husband started that same story. Work meeting, traffic jam, phone died. Before I knew it, another woman was wearing the perfume I bought for him." Martha chuckled weakly, though her eyes betrayed the flicker of doubt forming within. "Daniel isn't like that. she whispered, almost to herself. Tai watched her, shaking her head slowly. They all say that until they see the truth with their own eyes. If I were you, I'd follow him one night. You'll see what's hidden in darkness. The suggestion lingered in the air long after Tai's laughter had faded. Martha stood by the window, looking out at the sun-drenched compound. The gardener was trimming the hibiscus hedge, and children ran past the gate shouting in play. The world outside felt so normal, yet inside her, something had shifted. She could still see Daniel's distant eyes, his distracted tone, his hesitation before touching her. They had once been the perfect couple, admired by friends and family. People often said Daniel and Martha were blessed by God. A handsome husband, a graceful wife, a beautiful home. But what people saw wasn't what she was feeling now. She picked up one of Daniel's shirts from the laundry basket and inhaled again. The same strange perfume. Her throat tightened. Maybe I'm imagining things, she whispered. But her body knew the truth her mind refused to name. Later that evening, as the sun melted behind the city skyline, Martha stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair slowly. Daniel had called, saying he might be home late again. She heard the words, yet her heart stopped at the phrase. Might be. Her reflection stared back at her poised, controlled, but with eyes that burned with a question she could no longer silence. The house glowed with warm lamplight, but she felt the shadows creeping in again. The faint hum of a generator down the street filled the background, mingling with the cries of street hawkers calling out, "Suya! Hot suya!" from the roadside. Everything around her carried life, but inside her chest, doubt had taken root, spreading quietly like smoke. She remembered their first years of marriage, the laughter, the late-night drives through the city, the way Daniel would whisper her name like a prayer. Now, even when he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. There was a distance she couldn't measure, an absence that clung to every word. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to silence Tai's voice in her head, but she couldn't ignore the unease, the invisible thread pulling her towards something she didn't want to find. That night, she waited again. The house slept in silence. The clock struck 11. The air smelled of rain, heavy and still. She stood by the window, her hands trembling slightly, her heart pacing faster than time itself. Somewhere down the street, headlights flashed briefly, then disappeared. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. She remembered Tai's words. If you want peace, find the truth yourself. The phrase echoed, carving itself into her heart. The bedroom door was ajar, and Daniel's side of the bed was untouched. She sat at the edge of the mattress, her bare feet pressing into the cool tile. The night pressed close around her, full of unanswered questions. She looked at his phone on the table, the screen glowing with a missed call from an unknown number. Her fingers hovered over it, her mind fighting between love and suspicion. A gust of wind rattled the curtains, and she stepped back, startled. She could almost hear her mother's voice from years ago. When a woman's spirit starts to shake, it is never without reason. The phone buzzed again, once, twice. Then silence. Martha exhaled, her pulse wild. She turned off the lights, letting the room drown in darkness. But even in that darkness, the decision began to form quietly, powerfully, inevitable. She would not confront him yet. Not with words. She would wait, watch, follow. She rose, moved toward the window, and watched the rain begin to fall in soft, rhythmic sheets. Her reflection in the glass was faint now, blurred by the droplets sliding down like tears. Next time, she whispered into the still air, her voice trembling but sure. Next time he goes out late, I will follow him. The storm began before sunset, creeping over the sky like a dark cloth drawn across the face of the world. By the time the first roll of thunder trembled through the air, the city had begun to fold into itself. Vendors pulled tarps over their goods, minibuses honked in protest as streets flooded, and the smell of wet dust rose from the red soil roads. Inside the house, Martha stood by the window, her arms crossed tightly, watching Daniel fasten the buttons of his shirt. He looked striking even in the dim light, tall and neatly dressed, his tie slightly loosened. His scent lingered woodsy, warm and familiar, yet tonight it felt distant. "You're going out?" she asked quietly. He nodded without meeting her eyes. "Yes, there's some office work to finish before morning." The lie tasted obvious, too smooth to be true. He reached for his umbrella, gave her a faint smile, and left with hurried steps. The door clicked shut behind him, and silence filled the house again, broken only by the low grumble of thunder. Martha stood motionless for a long moment, her breath shallow. The rain had begun to fall in thin, silver lines, striking the window pane like impatient fingers. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, her thoughts a storm of their own. Her instincts battled her trust. The memory of Tatai's warning echoed in her ears. "Follow him, my sister. See for yourself." Slowly, almost mechanically, she reached for her wrapper and tied it over her dress. Her slippers made soft sounds on the tile as she moved through the room. On the wall, Daniel's photograph smiled down at her, the same smile he had given her on their wedding day. She touched the frame lightly, her heart trembling with something she couldn't yet name. She grabbed her umbrella, slipped on her raincoat, and stepped into the night. The wind caught her scarf as the gate closed behind her with a low metallic groan. The street glistened with rainwater, reflecting the flickering glow of streetlights. Yellow minibuses still crawled through the flooded roads, their horns blaring in frustration. The air smelled of roasted corn, smoke, and the sharp tang of wet iron. Martha kept her distance, her eyes fixed on the figure ahead. Daniel, walking briskly, his umbrella tilted forward. She followed him quietly, her footsteps muffled by the sound of the rain. Each step sent ripples through puddles that mirrored the trembling lights of passing cars. She moved past a group of boys huddled under a roadside stall, their laughter rising above the storm. Her chest tightened as she watched Daniel turn into a narrow street lined with old, crumbling buildings. Her heart pounded harder. The narrow street looked almost abandoned. Wooden doors leaned off their hinges, and the walls were painted with the scars of age and graffiti. The rainwater ran in thin streams along the gutters, carrying with it bits of paper and wilted leaves. Martha's breath came fast as she ducked behind an old kiosk, her umbrella trembling in her grip. Daniel was a few meters ahead, standing before a large, broken building with shattered windows and a sagging roof. A faint glow flickered from inside. He looked around once, then knocked gently on the wooden door. Martha held her breath. The door creaked open, and he slipped inside. Her hands grew clammy, as fear and curiosity wrestled within her. "So this is where he comes?" she whispered to herself, her voice drowned by the rain. The rain softened to a drizzle. Martha crept closer, careful not to make a sound. Her slippers made quiet splashes in the puddles, and the smell of damp earth filled her lungs. She stood before the cracked wall of the building, her heart thudding so loudly she feared someone might hear it. The wooden door was slightly ajar. Through a narrow crack she could see faint movement. She leaned in, her cheek brushing the wet, cold surface of the wall. At first, all she saw was shadow, the flicker of lantern light, the outline of figures moving within. Then her eyes adjusted, and she gasped softly. Daniel was kneeling in front of a group of children, their faces thin and bright-eyed. They were laughing, their voices soft and full of wonder. Daniel reached into a large plastic bag beside him and began handing out wrapped parcels food by the smell of it. The scent of rice and stew drifted through the air, mingling with the musty damp of the old building. Martha pressed her palm to her lips. The children, barefoot and soaked from the rain, gathered around him, their joy spilling into the room like sunlight. He smiled as he passed each of them a small container, speaking to them in low, gentle tones. "Eat well, my friends. Tomorrow will be better, I promise." His voice was calm, steady, carrying a kindness she hadn't seen in weeks. Martha's eyes filled with tears. She didn't understand shame, love, relief, all tangled together. One of the smallest children, no more than 5, tugged at Daniel's sleeve. "Uncle, will you come again tomorrow?" The boy's voice was shy, trembling between hope and fear. Daniel laughed softly and placed a hand on the child's head. "If God gives me strength, I will," he said. The boy grinned, clutching his food close to his chest. The lantern light caught Daniel's face, revealing a warmth so pure that Martha's heart broke a little. She had imagined betrayal, another woman, lies, yet here he was, kneeling in the dirt, giving himself to children who had no one else. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, her breath shaky. "Oh, Daniel," she whispered. Inside, Daniel began to unpack another bag. This one contained folded clothes, old shirts, small shoes, scarves. The children reached out eagerly, and he handed each item with quiet care, ensuring every pair of hands received something. Martha noticed how his fingers trembled slightly, not from fatigue, but from the effort of love itself. He smiled often, the way he used to smile at her years ago, unguarded and full of light. She pressed her back against the wall, her heart beating faster, now not from suspicion, but from awe. She remembered how he had grown up poor, how he once told her stories of sharing meals with neighbors during his childhood. It suddenly made sense. This was who Daniel truly was. The rain thickened again, drumming softly on the rusted roof. The lantern flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. Martha remained hidden, unable to step forward, yet unable to leave. Guilt washed over her in waves. Every unspoken doubt, every accusing thought, each now felt like a wound she had inflicted on herself. She had followed him through the storm, thinking she'd find proof of deceit. Instead, she had found grace. Still, she could not look away. There was a strange beauty in the scene before her, the roughness of the place, the laughter of hungry children, the quiet dignity of her husband giving more than anyone had asked. Then, as if sensing something, Daniel paused. He looked toward the door. Martha froze. The lantern's flame quivered, and the children went silent for a heartbeat. Daniel rose slowly, brushing the dust from his trousers. His eyes narrowed, scanning the darkness. The faintest movement of the door betrayed her. She stepped back quickly, but her heel struck a loose stone. It rolled across the ground with a loud, hollow sound. The children turned their heads, whispering. Daniel moved toward the door. Martha's pulse roared in her ears. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to obey. The rain seemed to fall harder, as though urging her to move. The door creaked open, and Daniel's silhouette filled the doorway. He peered into the night, the light behind him outlining his strong shoulders and calm stance. "Who's there?" he called, his voice cutting through the rain. Martha clutched her umbrella tightly, her breath shallow. The air between them was heavy, charged with everything unsaid. Their eyes met his full of surprise, hers wide with shame and wonder. For a long, trembling second, neither spoke. The rain fell between them like a curtain, silver and endless. And in that moment, Martha knew their world was about to change forever. Rain dripped steadily from the torn roof of the old building, forming dark puddles around the doorway. Daniel stood frozen for a moment, his eyes locked on Martha's trembling figure just outside. She was soaked to the bone, her hair clinging to her cheeks, her wrapper heavy with water. Yet her gaze was soft, uncertain, but full of raw emotion. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Daniel stepped closer, his face calm, his tone gentle. "Martha," he said simply, the sound of her name carrying both surprise and care. She couldn't hold it in any longer. Her lips parted, but the words came out as sobs. "I'm sorry, Daniel. I thought something else." She dropped her umbrella and her tears mixed with the rain. He reached for her hand, warm against her cold fingers. "Come inside," he said softly. "You'll catch a fever standing out there." She followed him in, her breath shaky as she crossed the threshold. The sight before her was humbling. The children had stopped eating, their small faces lit by the glow of the lantern. One of them giggled shyly at the sight of her, and another waved. Daniel bent slightly, his tall frame graceful even in the dim light. "Don't mind her," he told the children with a faint smile. "She's my wife." The children's faces brightened with understanding. Martha's heart twisted. The air smelled of rice and smoke, the faint scent of Daniel's cologne drifting near her. The warmth inside the building was almost holy compared to the cold rain outside. "I shouldn't have doubted you," she whispered. Her voice quivered as she looked at him. "You were only trying to help them." Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting a quiet strength. "You didn't know," he replied. "I didn't tell you because some things are better done quietly." They sat down on a rough wooden bench as the children continued eating. The soft rustle of rain against the tin roof filled the pauses between their words. Martha's mind replayed every moment of her suspicion, the perfume, the late nights, Tai-Tai's warnings. Shame burned in her chest, yet Daniel's calm presence was undoing her guilt. One heartbeat at a time. "You come here every night?" she asked. He shook his head slightly. "Not every night. Only when I can. I grew up not far from here. When my father died, people from the street fed me and my brothers for weeks. I swore that when I could, I'd give something back. But I didn't want to talk about it. Because—" he hesitated, his voice dropping. "I didn't want it to sound like charity for praise." Martha looked at him, and in that moment she saw not just her husband, but a man of quiet conviction. The children, full and happy, began playing near the door, splashing in the rainwater that pooled in corners. One of them offered Martha a small piece of bread. She smiled through her tears and took it. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The child grinned, missing 2 front teeth. Daniel chuckled softly. They share whatever they have, even when it's little. His eyes softened when he looked at her, as though forgiving her without needing words. She reached for his hand under the table, her fingers brushing his. It was a small touch, but it carried more apology than 100 words. He squeezed her hand gently, and the world around them seemed to still. When the rain eased, Daniel began packing the empty containers back into his bag. Martha helped, drying each one with a cloth she found nearby. Their movements were in quiet harmony, a rhythm that spoke of forgiveness and familiarity. "You amaze me," she said finally, her tone full of wonder. "All this time I thought you were pulling away, but you were just giving somewhere else." Daniel gave a small laugh. "You're not wrong, though. I should have told you. Love needs honesty, not guessing games." He closed the last container and straightened. "Next time, you'll come with me." Martha looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. "If you'll have me." His reply was simple. "Always." They stepped out into the night together. The street glistened with rain, reflecting the dim light of passing motorcycles. A cool breeze brushed Martha's cheeks, carrying the smell of wet soil and roasted plantain from a nearby vendor who had resumed work after the storm. Daniel held the umbrella, though most of the rain had stopped, and she walked close beside him. The silence between them was no longer heavy, it was peaceful, like two hearts breathing in rhythm again. "Daniel," she said softly as they turned the corner toward home. "I was foolish." He shook his head. "No, just human. Doubt comes when love grows quiet. But it's what we do next that matters." She squeezed his hand tightly, and he smiled down at her. Back home, the compound was still, the sound of water dripping from the mango tree in the yard. Inside, Martha lit the small lamp in the sitting room. The familiar scent of home freshly cleaned floors, fabric softener, the faint perfume of the curtains embraced her like a comfort she hadn't felt in days. Daniel took off his shoes, stretched, and leaned back on the couch. He looked tired but peaceful. Martha went to the kitchen, her steps light, and returned with 2 cups of hot tea. She placed one beside him and sat close, their shoulders touching. The warmth of the tea rose in small curls of steam between them. "You know," she began, her voice thoughtful, "Titai would faint if she heard this story." Daniel laughed quietly. "Then maybe you shouldn't tell her everything." "Oh, I will," she replied with a small grin. "But not tonight." Their laughter faded into silence again, not the uneasy kind that had filled the house for weeks, but the silence of understanding. A clock on the wall ticked softly. Outside, a frog croaked somewhere near the gutter. Daniel sipped his tea, his voice low. "Martha, I forgive you. But more than that, I want you to trust again. I never meant to make you worry." She turned toward him, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and admiration. "And I forgive myself for doubting. I saw only what fear wanted me to see." Her fingers traced the rim of her cup slowly. "You reminded me tonight that love is quiet, not loud. It doesn't need proof, it just needs presence." Daniel nodded, his gaze fixed on her. "And sometimes, love teaches through pain. What matters is that we learn." Later, they moved to the bedroom. The faint hum of the ceiling fan filled the room. Martha changed into dry clothes and sat by the window, watching the faint shimmer of city lights in the distance. Daniel joined her, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. "You look peaceful again," he murmured. She smiled. "I am. For the first time in weeks." The rain had stopped completely now, leaving behind the smell of freshness that only comes after a storm. The night was quiet except for the faint murmur of a passing car. Daniel sat beside her, and for a long moment they simply listened to the silence, to each other, to the beating of their hearts. Martha turned to him, her expression tender. "You know, I almost ruined everything tonight." Daniel looked at her, his smile kind. "No, you just reminded me that love needs tending. Like a garden. Even the strongest plants wilt if we stop watering them." She laughed softly. "And I was ready to uproot ours." He chuckled, reaching out to tuck a damp curl of hair behind her ear. "But you didn't. You followed me instead. That took courage." Her eyes filled again, but this time the tears were light, cleansing. "I'll never doubt you like that again," she said. "Not after tonight." He drew her closer, his voice low and steady. "If ever doubt comes again, just ask. I'd rather explain 1,000 times than watch you hurt in silence." She nodded against his shoulder, breathing in the warmth of him. The room seemed smaller now, cozier, as if love itself had drawn the walls closer. The lamp's light softened the edges of their shadows, and the air felt lighter. They stayed like that for a while. No words, no defenses, just the steady rhythm of trust being rebuilt. Outside, a gentle wind rustled through the trees, as though blessing their newfound peace. When they finally lay down, the world outside had gone still. The storm was a memory, And so was the fear. Daniel reached for her hand under the blanket, his touch reassuring. Martha smiled in the dark, her heart full. The lesson of the night glowed quietly between them, unspoken but eternal. As she drifted towards sleep, she whispered the words that had formed in her soul. Doubt destroys faster than truth heals. Trust is love's strongest proof.